And Waneek joins me now. Waneek, I am so happy to see you. I have to tell you, I had the distinct honor of co-hosting the Canada Sports Hall of Fame induction ceremony in 2019 with Ron. And it's the first time that I had seen you speak in person, and your speech blew me away. But I'm going to quote a line for you, and I just want you to tell me what comes to your mind. At the best of times, I was different. At the worst of times, I was a problem, but I promise you, I was never boring. How much does this encapsulate you?
Oh, that is me in a nutshell. You know, I've always been that kind of person, a little bit different. I mean, for right from when I was a little kid, like I was born in my community of Gunawaga, but I grew up a lot in Ottawa. And, with a name like Waneek, I was born as part of the first generation of kind of kids that were being given Indigenous names. So, I grew up with a lot of, Sally's, Peters, and Mike's, and then there's a Waneek, right? And I'm like, right from the get-go, I was different. I looked different, I had a different name, I was called weird a lot. And I remember thinking to myself, either this is gonna bother me and it be a source of pain for me the rest of my life, or I'm gonna embrace it and own that weirdness, that otherness. And I really have. I knew I was different because I was told, I was pointed out, often by officials and, other coaches, oh, what are you? Where are you from? Like, and, so that otherness, that differentness was something that I had to learn to live in that space. So I just owned it and tried not to be too crazy, but you never know. But
We all have our moments, right?
yeah. Yeah.
I know your mother is a huge source of inspiration for you, and she would have been your counsel all along the way, both in athletics and life. If you could describe your mom, Kantinata, is that how I say her name?
Mhm. Mhm.
If you
Yeah.
could describe her, how would you do that?
Um, I would describe her as the most courageous, beautiful warrior woman I've ever known,
Mm.
and that I hope that I can live up to that standard that she set forth for us. I'm a mom now of 3, and I go through the daily grind of motherhood and, even the grind of motherhood, but also in the face of what's going on in the world around us, with COVID, with all the racial issues that are being talked about right now, like just everything. And it can be incredibly terrifying, overwhelming when you have these little kids looking at you, as their anchor for everything. You are their source of hope and source of security and everything. And, I remember that seeing my mom. My mom was a single mom, and I cannot believe how she was able to give us all that she did. Like, she has this deep down courage. And let me tell you, having her at my back my whole life, I didn't like, I love having a lot of people at my back, but really essentially, she is the one that I needed there no matter what. She's the one I looked up into the crowd at the Olympics and
Mm.
hoped she was watching, and, trying to make her proud. And at the end, I said this in the speech, like when I asked, how could I ever repay you? She would say, just do it for your kids. It was
Mm.
just this like sense of, this is what I'm here for. And, to have someone like that in your life as an Indigenous woman, uh, really powerful. Me and my sisters are all like little mini versions of her, like little warrior women in our own. And then we all have daughters. All of them are little warrior women. My mom has created like a ruckus empire.
So this activist gene that is passed on to you, before we get to Oka, which of course we'll talk about, I mean, where did it come from in your mom? Where did she inherit that from?
Yeah, my mother was born in 1940. Okay, so my grandfather, my great grandfather, we come from a line of war chiefs, and the Haudenosaunee people are very like activist. We our history within this country is very different as allies, and since contact. And so we've been handed down a lot of these stories and understandings of our who we are and what we are. Um and just the transformation from ally to kind of colonize was very
Mm.
traumatizing for all Indigenous people, but in when you have these stories of what we did in the like wars of 1812 and all that kind of stuff. And so, my mom was born in 1940, and she was born in a time where Indigenous people couldn't vote. If you served in the military, you lost your status. If you got a university degree, you lost your status. There was all these things, these limitations. You couldn't leave your reserve with a pass from the Indian agent. And a lot of children were being apprehended and put into residential school. And in the early 50s, the federal government decided to expropriate our land that all on to build the seaway that you have, the St. Lawrence Seaway. Mm-hmm. And both of her grandfathers fought that. Like, they barely spoke English, actually spoke Mohawk, and they went to Ottawa and they fought and fought and fought against it. And one of them, he was a farmer, and he was a war chief, and he was the most powerful person she'd ever known. Like, that person in our culture is like the chief of police, principal, and guidance counselor, all wrapped up into one, the most prominent person. And he was a farmer, and he fought. He refused to leave his house, and they dug to the very front of his home, forced him out of his home, demolished his house, and kept digging. And so she saw the most influential person in her life treated that way, and she knew right away we were not on even footing. And so, like, my mom being born into a family where you don't just do nothing, you do something. And so that's how she became active in the 60s as a Native rights activist.
Now, let's, I guess, get to Oka. First of all, I mean, many of us remember it as the Oka Crisis. Is that what you call it? Or do you call it the Mohawk Resistance? Do you call it something different?
I call it all of that. My mother calls it the war. We call it all those things. Yes. Yeah.
So we see that famous photo of you with your sister on you and the soldier standing on you. This is the last day. The women had made the decision to walk out peacefully, but you ended up with a bayonet in your chest. How much of that do you remember?
That's the great thing about traumatic experiences. It's like I can, I tend to contain it and put it in a nice little and keep it deep in my psyche. But if I open that, I'll leave in a little crack. I can shut my eyes and I can remember the temperature, the sounds, the everything of that moment, everything.
So, I mean, here we are in an interview. This has become your sort of, your activist gene, your raison d'etre in a way, and you are forced to talk about this or willingly talk about this. How do you do that? How do you do that and cope?
It's hard. And I just had an interview. It's the 30th anniversary coming up. By no means is the Oka Crisis just about me. It's about my entire community. It's about a whole generation. It's about a whole history of a country. And I look at my role now and the courage my mom had to do whatever it took for us. I think I look now and I look at my children and I look at all the Indigenous children out there, but I also look at all the kids out there in Canada. And I say, you know what? Our generation, we need to do better. We need to make sure that this never happens again. And I'm a bit of living history. I can give that first-hand experience. And I do it. And I remind Canadians of what can happen if we don't fix this broken relationship. And it's broken, but it doesn't mean it has to stay broken. And, as an Olympic athlete, I've always used my role as a bridge between two worlds to help, go forward as a nation, as a people, towards something where we can all be proud of. I dream that. I'm an Olympic athlete, right? Shoot for the moon. Maybe you land among the stars. I think about Canada as this great experiment that has never, ever existed on this planet anywhere. A truly multicultural society where no matter what race, gender, identity, sexual identity, economic level, that you can achieve your greatest potential and you can be safe. I believe in that. And I want that to happen. So, but it's going to take an Olympian effort by all of us to get there. And, Oka is the worst case scenario if we decide to do nothing.
I have to wonder if the current racial crisis or movement, maybe we can look at it with hope. Does that bring something up for you? I mean, you've been in the middle of protests, you've seen this firsthand. But yeah, what does it bring up for you when you look at what's happening in our world now?
It infuriates me because I think in Canada that there is racism, but it's different. It's differently. It's different. It's exhibited differently, and it's more of like that polite racism. It's like it's institutionalized. It's the way things are done. It's seeped into the systems of this society, and it keeps people out. It keeps people the other, and it will continue to be a problem until we face that. I believe that, we need to be angry, and Canadians should be angry, not just people of color, not just Blacks or Indigenous people or people of color. I think all Canadians should be angry and say, that's not what it means to be a Canadian for me. And when we start hearing regular Canadians say that, then we're going to see change.
Back to something your mother said, because again, this is the theme. In Oka, after you were injured, you could have shut down. You could have just cocooned, and but again, it was her words where she said, "You can't be his victim." Correct? I'm paraphrasing, yeah. But so, what made you go outward again?
I think it's that that fight gene, that fight or die gene, but also my natural inclination. I just am not that type of person to stay angry, to cocoon. I mean, I did for a while, but I'm a naturally very interested person, and I knew I didn't want to be under anybody's power, handing over a dream to somebody for the rest of my life and have to tell people, well, no, I had all these great skills and I was showing potential, but, and my mom said, people would have understood. They would understand and they wouldn't blame you. And, throughout my life, I have faced other traumatic experiences and other things, other obstacles I've had to go through. And, let me tell you, resilience is not it's something you're born with, but it's also a muscle that you have to work. You have to continuously work at it, and you get stronger at it, and you get better at it, you get tougher. And that toughness shell that I've created is guarding my very gentle heart. That's the core of me.
That's beautiful. 1999, gold at the Pan Am Games with the water polo team. You end up in Sydney in 2000. That's 10 years after what happened in Oka. Did you have moments then where you reflected back and thought, I really did this?
It was like, you get, ask any Olympic athlete training for the Olympics. You just it's so hard. It's so much work, it's so much stress. And, especially the final years that you're slogging your way through it. And then your head pops up and you're at the Olympics, and it's almost exactly 10 years to the date, that I was stabbed. And to think all along that path, whether it's pre-existing ideas of what Indigenous people can achieve that didn't expect it. As an Indigenous woman, what are the rates of me? What are the statistics that I was fighting against? All of that, Oka and all of the things that I fought against, even in myself, people constantly telling me throughout my career that, Indigenous people were quitters, we're good athletes, but we can't stick it out. We're not that smart. We can't get team tactics. So when you get there, like, oh my God, first of all, I was in my head thinking of that guy that stabbed me, that tried to kill me. And I'm like, I hope you're watching. I hope that I have made my name as big as the biggest sign in Vegas saying I'm here. You weren't able to do that. And I wanted that sign to be big so that all of my people would see me and feel pride in themselves. Because, being from a community, being from an Indigenous community, but not just mine, but the entire Indigenous community, I wanted all those young women to see me and say, you know what, I want to do that too.
Waneek, I'll ask you one final question that we're leaving all our guests with, and that is, what is the best advice you would give to a young Waneek?
I probably, if I could talk to my young self, I would say, try to listen more. Try to have less fear and anxiety, and try to see the heart of people. Try harder. You know, I had my walls up. I was extraordinarily angry as a teenager, defenses, and you know, and looking back, you know, I mean, it made me a ferocious water polo player, right? But I know the impact I had on people, and it wasn't always loving. So I would say that to myself, because I thought it was strength, but I think it was sometimes came from a place of fear. And I would try to tell myself just to breathe, try to see their heart, and try to connect your heart with theirs, and find that common bond. But you know, that it would have probably saved me a lot of pain if I could have done that. You know.
Well, 2020 hindsight, but it's good advice for your kids and for everybody out there. Waneek, thank you for bringing your strength and your gentle heart. I so appreciate it.
Thank you so much. You know, I'll go on. Every day is Indigenous Day in my world. Take care. At the best of times, I was different. At the worst of times, I was a problem. But I promise you, I was never boring.
She was a great athlete, but that's only part of what she brings to the table. She brings her impact upon her people and her community and her culture, try to break down some of the barriers and bridges that exist in our society to make it a better place.
There wasn't any space in sport for someone like me. I had to fight for it. I had to fight stereotypes and intolerance.
She never backed down. She never backed off. That's the one thing I noticed about her. She's pretty tough.
My mom said, I remember when you first said you wanted to go to the Olympics when you were 8 years old. And I got down on my knee and I looked you in the eye. I said, you can do it, and I'll help you.
The basis of our culture is that we're supposed to settle things through sport. That's why I helped her so much in it. I saw what it was doing for her.
I loved showing the world what my people could do. I loved showing how tough Indigenous women were, how amazing we were. I thought of all of my ancestors that came before me. I wanted to make them proud.